Hey, and welcome to Anchored in Christ, latest episode of our podcast, now on YouTube, but also, of course, in any of your favorite podcast platforms.
Except for Instagram.
Well, okay, thanks
You're working on that.
I have to, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how
it's
much.
on his to-do list.
That really hurts.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm so behind on so many things, and my pastor
He's in charge of a whole radio show, etc., radio station, so he's got a lot on his plate.
And that didn't still stop you from making fun of me
still
here
did,
at the
yes.
outset of this podcast. But anyway, he's right. We do need to be on more platforms, and we will be. I'm Doug Hanna. I'm the co-host. Pastor Curt Hoover. Faith Lutheran Church is where we are located now. That's pastor's. He's the pastor here, and this is my home church.
Thompson Station, so this is a south suburb of Nashville.
Just outside of Nashville. And I've been going here about 5 years. Pastor's been here for 20. And we are all about the gospel, properly proclaimed. The gospel is, there's a lot of things it's not that people think it is when they hear that word. It's not the message that you need to hear to get saved, and then it's no longer relevant. Like, the gospel is what needs to be preached for unbelievers. They need to hear about how to be saved, and then once they hear it, good. No, that's not it. Everything I'm saying here is the gospel is more than that. The gospel is not a bunch of life instructions that God would like you to follow so that you can then make sure you're in a better place with Him. That's also not what it is. The gospel properly proclaimed is quite simply what we hear in the scriptures over and over and over again. And I'll sum it up with one verse. It's not the only verse, but while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's the gospel. Repent and believe, and you rest in that the sins, the shortcomings, the works you didn't do that you should have done, the ones you did that you shouldn't have, for the sake of Jesus, the Father God forgives all of those. And you get free at that point, a real freedom, not a sort of, all right, now I'm free and forgiven, I've got to earn it, like at the end of Saving Private Ryan, make it worth it. No, none of that's true. So if we don't get any of this, any other message of all the words we spill, that's the one we want to get out, that the gospel is about Christ crucified for us sinners. We are all in desperate need of a Savior, and thank the Lord we have one in Christ. So that's the message. We also tease out the implications of what that means in our everyday life from the Scriptures. Last week we got onto the Fourth Commandment, honor your father and mother. And
Fourth or fifth commandment?
Yeah, depending on your tradition. Yeah, but that's the one. And so there's so many aspects to that. We thought it was worthy of a second episode. We talked yesterday primarily about the submitting part of that, how that commandment is not just limited to honoring or
honor your father and mother.
It's
implies the
authority.
Submission
Yeah,
first.
but it goes beyond
Now
just
we're
that
into
relationship.
the father and mother part.
Yeah, but it doesn't just go to that relationship.
Right.
It goes to pastor, parishioner. It goes to law enforcement officer, citizen. It goes to spouse. Sometimes even in the in the parent-child dynamic, it reverses as parents age and need more care. And so there's all kinds of aspects.
Care
to that.
receiver, caregiver, I would
It's a good
say
way to
is
put
maybe
it.
a good way to put
Good
it.
way to put it. So, but the other side of that coin is the authority part. And it might be assumed that we just know exactly how that should work. Well, I should submit to authority, and if you are an authority, I should exert authority. That doesn't really cut it, though. There's more to it than that.
No, it's a huge amount of responsibility. By the way, I was just kind of keeping quiet and receiving from you in authority your verbalizing the gospel. I'm glad you're in radio.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, if we're not, doing that, I don't really see the point of showing up, honestly. And I'm not virtue signaling here. It's like I've been in Christian media and churches for 4 decades. I'm not interested in spinning up a bunch of energy in my late 50s to just give people more life advice, 5 tips to a better living, or more law. You're messing up and falling short. You better do better. The gospel is the only message we need, and we don't just need it as unbelievers. We need it as believers every single day.
And I say that because I listen to the radio and I choose what channel I'm going to listen to.
Right.
And so choosing what channel I listen to depends on who I will decide I want to submit authority to. So I'm very glad that you've had a long career in Christian radio, delivering in a broadcast fashion that gospel with an ever-increasing amount of faithfulness. And I relish that you're doing that.
I appreciate that. It's a privilege.
I think that there's a lot of people who have assumed that authority because they've got that job, if you will, or vocation, and maybe should probably spend more time thinking of the responsibility.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's true. Yeah, a platform certainly is a privilege, not a right. So, in the authority sense, it has to be when we talk about who the authorities are in our lives, and times when we are authorities. There's a number of things to point out here. I guess the first one would be it has to be done according to God's word and not our own instincts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that when God said, "Be fruitful and multiply" to Adam and Eve, it's because he wanted more children. Not because he was telling pagans, go have a lot more pagans. So I take that, honor your father and mother side, commandment, the responsibility of being a faithful, rearing your children to be children of God.
Yes.
Responsibility really, really seriously.
Yes.
And I'm afraid sometimes that we listen to the wrong sermon. So even Christian parents, love to hear sort of the Ephesians 5 kind of conversation, or even just, you give it to them, Pastor, on that commandment. The kids, make sure they pay attention. When I tell them to clean the room, you give it to them. I think you're listening to the wrong sermon. And I've dealt with that a little bit. I've almost, ushered one group out while I give them their sermon in here. And
not a bad idea.
Exchange, because we listened to the wrong sermon. Parents, so honor your father and mother, that it may be well with you. We hold an office that's divinely given to us of huge responsibility. I truly respect our armed forces at times like, what we've been going through in the world lately, that the authority and responsibility is just huge for the protection of us citizens and our neighbors and so forth. The seriousness by which an armed forces soldier wears a uniform to protect is this commandment in spades.
Right. Yeah.
Police officers of uniform, public officials who should not see it as one of privilege, and I take a little umbrage on the privilege thing, but responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's the nature of this commandment.
Mm-hmm.
Bosses, employers, taking responsibility, caregiving their people. I think we used to embrace that more than we do now. Teachers, really entrusted with the care of souls and the kids that they have. All of those things are just so critical. Hence that the Lord says, if you don't do that job right, it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea.
Yeah,
do it.
By the way, does everybody know what a millstone is? I had never seen one in person until a trip this summer to Holland, Michigan. If you don't know much about Holland, it's a Dutch community in origin, and it embraces that for tourist purposes, but there's a lot of people of Dutch heritage there, and they have an actual working windmill that was brought in from the Netherlands and placed there in Holland, and you're able to take a tour of it. It still works today, creating grain. So it's just, and you can view exactly how it works. And I came face to face with an actual millstone. Do you know the dimensions of this thing? It's a giant semi-truck tire, and probably even bigger than that, of nothing but concrete. And when I looked at that and I realized its purpose, it needed to be that heavy to accomplish the task at hand, I thought of Jesus' words. What if that was thrown around my neck and I was tossed into the sea? I mean, that's an extreme analogy, but millstone at that point to me was a meaningless term. And when I saw one in person, I was like, yikes.
Yeah, I saw the area in Capernaum where they did the milling for the grains, obviously, but also for oil. And so he used all of that analogy, and they were huge.
Yes.
And Capernaum's right next to the Sea of Galilee, which is very deep and very big.
And Jesus said it would be better to have that happen to you than to disobey me on this point. So
on that point, because it's a commandment to those in caregiving roles, responsibilities, vocations.
And doesn't Paul also say a lot of you shouldn't aspire to be teachers?
Right.
You shouldn't. They shouldn't. Ambition shouldn't be a part of it here.
No, that's not what this commandment speaks of.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of ambitious.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, we've got a nasty habit of seeking roles of so-called authority by right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you ever approach some of those positions by right, I'm likely not to encourage you to do it.
Yeah.
Because that's not the right attitude.
Yeah, you start there. Why is it that I would like to be in authority over something? And ask that question of yourself. It's a humbling one. It's a sobering one. And if you don't like the answer, you probably should pause on pursuing that. So what does it mean to be a good authority?
Godly. I mean, we are ambassadors. We are under shepherds, literally. So a police officer is an under shepherd of God. God's hand to protect our town of Spring Hill Thompson Station are police officers. But there are also nurses and doctors who, by the way, you had better pay attention to. But you've got to be a godly doctor. I love going to the hospitals and visiting folks and poking my head into the chapels at a hospital and seeing a surgeon in there on his knees before surgery. Those are people that understand this commandment.
Yeah.
Parents should wake up that way.
There's one you didn't mention that I think is crucial. One of the keys to being a good authority is don't abdicate the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And for I think a lot of people, particularly parents, that's one that's tough because God did in fact call you to an authority role, and to not embrace that is really a form of disobedience. I hate to say it that way, but it's true.
It's neglect. It's sin by omission.
Yeah, there are areas in life, particularly spiritually. You know, I'm an elder in this church. That comes with a certain amount of expectation that I'll have authority over certain things. I can't then govern myself as, well, you know, whatever you think is best. You know, there's a fine line, right, between being cooperative and gentle in spirit, but also saying, well, God gave me a responsibility here. I can't just pretend like it's not there. That's crucial, and I think it's overlooked.
For pastors, ordination day, when they put a stole around my neck, I've always heard those are the heaviest things you will ever have put over your neck. And there's truth to that because of that responsibility. When my son was born, our firstborn, a similar stole I felt of parenthood.
I felt that one too, yeah.
Man, somebody who just absolutely depends upon me for absolutely everything, I better live up to that expectation.
Right.
It's a responsibility from God.
Right. I'm going to get made fun of for this one, but that's okay. That's why we put content out there, to generate engagement. When we got married in 1988, we did what we call the traditional wedding vows. I don't know if they're historically traditional, but the ones that are almost never done now, where my wife stood up before God and all these witnesses and vowed to honor and obey me. She said the words. I like to remind her of that a lot. That always works real well for me.
You're hearing the wrong sermon.
No, I know. I'm teasing.
I know you are.
But she said the words. She had the option to not say the words. There wasn't a church that would have, I think, insisted on it if she'd wanted to omit that. She chose that for a reason. And I think sometimes it's just difficult in our relationships, as whether it's parents or spouses, to really embrace the roles as God gave them to us and not take our cues from the culture. My wife and I have that kind of relationship where she does submit to me. But when you say that, people immediately think that, well, she's subservient, I'm the boss and she's the employee. It's none of those things. It simply is an acknowledgement of, look, whether you like it or not, this is how God designed the marriage relationship. The husband is the head of the house. The wife is to submit.
Which means you are Christ to her.
Yes, I am.
Sacrificially.
And what did Jesus do for us?
Right.
I mean, yeah, he tells us what to do, but mostly what he did was give himself up for us.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was a one-sided. I will love you whether you love me back.
Correct. So submission is exactly, I think in many ways, almost the opposite of what we think it is. And a lot of people will resist authority because they don't want to be guilty of forcing someone into submission, you know, in a weird way.
Well, we're not in a culture that likes authority other than we want privilege.
Right.
So we get the double whammy.
Yeah.
We don't take responsibility, and we start seizing that which should not be ours.
So if someone, physically or otherwise, is coming at my family, it's my job to step in there and
and
put a
you,
stop
by
to
the
that.
way, are responsible for the eternal
Yes.
destiny of your wife.
Yes,
That's the point of the responsibility.
that's right. That's right. And that's a heavy responsibility, and I can certainly
your kids.
I can certainly see why many guys would be like, whoa, 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 whoa.
And you should be.
Yeah, yeah. If you're not, if you're like, all right, bring it on, then that may be a problem. What are just in real life terms, if you're in a position of authority, we've already talked about it needs to be godly, but what are the challenges and temptations that come with that should be resisted? And I'll maybe give you a real world question to see how you handled that. So in your time as a pastor, I'm certain there have been times where you had to get the staff out and assert, your authority over a parishioner and say, nope, not in this place. Step up and stop something or address something or rebuke something. And I'm sure that when it first came up, you may have thought to yourself, this is going to be a problem because this person they're a troublemaker or they're difficult and it's not going to be fun. You're really not looking forward to it, but you do it anyway. Walk me through, if you don't have to get specifics, but walk me through a time when that happened and what your thought process was with regard to authority.
I relate it back to when my dad was raising me, because it's the same idea. When my dad was raising me, there were times where he pulled out the switch, if you will.
Right.
And that little lingo of this will hurt me more than it will you sometimes is just words, but for a parent who is about ready to inflict just a hair of pain in order to avoid the endangering of what I might do in the future, to stop that in a bud, that I know my dad went into his room and wept because of the tough lesson that he had to deal with me on. The same applies for pastor, to be perfectly honest. I mean, unless if my dad was a stranger or my dad passed off to a stranger, whip my kid for me. Yeah. That would be different.
Yeah.
But this was one who loved me.
Right.
And I knew it. And so as a pastor, my people will not submit to the authority until they know that I'm in it for them.
Yeah.
Really. And so it's always extended from my loving care for them. Really, the idea of submitting is solely for the purpose, even of us submitting to God. We're creature and he's creator, not because he wants to put us down, but because he wants to care for us and give us all the best stuff.
Right. He designed us.
We know it.
We designed us that way.
We know it.
Yeah. And then there are times when I think for some pastors, it is challenging. It's worth more trouble, or it's going to be more trouble than it's worth. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, and they let stuff go.
Yeah, that's not. You're not doing your responsibility.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It's like befriending your kids as opposed to parenting.
Yeah, I think that's a real problem. I think that if we had to look at the continuum of pastors that are being too protective of their flock versus pastors that aren't, I don't think the problem is the former in America today.
No, I mean, it's a fine line, obviously. I mean, leaders need to love their people. I expect the president to love the citizens of the United States in the way that they're supposed to. And
Right.
and that's not in every regard.
Right.
I don't expect them to be my dad or mom. I don't expect that because I've got a dad or mom. I do expect my mom and dad to be that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do expect them to legislate in a way that loves me and people who need to be cared for.
Right.
That's their job. Protect us.
So, just curious about this question. What about women and authority? There's a part of this where I know your answer. It's not any different, but in some of the ways that women need to embrace the role of authority, what might some of those be, and how is that unique?
Again, go back to the rights thing. And maybe I'll get some of those comments that are whatever, but I'm on an interview team basically that interviews guys that are considering the seminary. They've been, and they don't seek out the seminary really on their own. They've been told by, for instance, I was told by my pastor, you need to go do this. The job needs to be done, and you should go do it.
Right.
So in other words, it's not a self-picked thing.
Yes.
It's not in any sense a right. If it falls, the conversation falls into the area of rights for those kind of things. I should be a dad. I should be a parent. Those are the people that you kind of wonder, should you be a parent? Stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So in the interview stuff, if I hear even the guys being interviewed start speaking in terms of rights, I'm a man, so therefore I have the right to be a pastor. And I've heard this with regard to women's ordination as a concept. Well, if men have the right to be a pastor, then women should have the right to be a pastor. Well, my argument is, I think it's God's argument, quite honestly, is men don't have the right to be pastors. You had never submitted to a process by which maybe seminary might be in your future. Now, I've recommended that you consider it and you never said, well, I think I should be a pastor. Hence, you might be a perfect candidate for the process of honing and dealing with it from a humble standpoint. But if you ever came at it with I deserve to be, or just because I'm a man, so not every man should have that responsibility. By the way, not every man should have the responsibility of being a dad. Maybe I'll get some more comments on that.
So what do you mean by that?
If you are not going to live up to the responsibility of being a dad, and by the way, raising children for God, then I would recommend that you not have children. Sorry. Come argue with me. My phone number's on the site somewhere.
It is.
So that's fine. So in the conversation of if a woman is going to say, because men have the right to be a pastor, I should have the right to be a pastor, women should. Nobody has a right to be a pastor. I don't know that I can say it any more clear than that.
Yeah. One area I'm trying to keep this positive here because there are many times in life, many roles, vocations where women are called to be an authority. Of course, over their children, that seems obvious.
Yeah.
I don't get the sense that women struggle with that one quite as much, but I do think there is an element in parenting today, gentle parenting and whatnot, where we really do try to be our child's best friend, kind of an older, mentor rather than their parent.
Yeah, that's older, but older as
older
an
than the
age.
child.
Gotcha.
Older than the child.
Gotcha.
But I think for women that's a particular temptation because
counsel is a good concept.
Moms
if you're gonna be...
Moms often don't want to be the bad cop in the relationship, and I know in many marriages they leave that job to the dad. And if that works for you, great. But sometimes it's going to be the mother's place to say to the child, absolutely not. Not just don't have that snack because it's not dinner time yet, but on a deeper level where, no, you will listen to me for no other reason than that I am your mother.
I said so.
Yes.
I mean, that's fine. By your office. It says honor your father and your mother, not just your father.
Right.
Honor your father and your mother.
And that also implies that fathers and mothers need to embrace that role, which sometimes which calls for being an authority.
At that point, it's not really head of household so much as just parent.
Yeah.
That's a vocational thing.
Exactly.
By the way, vocation are a lot of things.
Absolutely. I got at least 6 that I can think of right now. Yeah.
And while you run a radio station, if you will, so there's kind of a caregiving authority place. You also report to somebody.
I do.
And that's a submissive place.
Yes.
And you must recognize that. You do.
And in a very real sense, we report to the listeners, because this is for them and they're helping to support it. So if we're kind of acting like they don't matter, well, that's not proper use of authority at all. And so that's important. This is another hot button issue, but I think it's relevant here as it relates to this topic of submitting to authority. And when you have couples who are deliberately childless, not because they can't, not even because of some trauma reason or something that's a little deeper than that, but just they have looked at the lifestyle that would cause, and they Christian parents now I'm speaking of, and they've just said, we're not going to have any kids by choice. That I think runs into the conflict here that we've been speaking of, that there is an authority and a word to submit to there. So speak to that in the context of the Fourth Commandment.
Yeah, I don't know that I could go dictate to people
of
who
course
are
not.
choosing not to have it.
But I think God has a point of view on it.
The point is even in Genesis 1 and 2 and so forth. And, his intention was to be fruitful and bear children for him. So one point of being married is to do that responsibly.
Right.
And rightfully.
One could argue that's sort of the fundamental purpose of marriage.
It appears to be, to raise children for God.
So, but let's be clear, because this is the internet. Of course, here's what we're not saying. It will still be misunderstood.
Probably.
We're not saying physical reasons. You know, it's a fertility issue. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about particular kinds of trauma that bring this particular subject home to bear. We're not speaking of that. And we're also not even speaking of you're at a place where maybe your marriage is in a tough spot right now, and you need to work on that first. But what I get a lot, I even hear this from some of my own children, is, well, we just don't have enough money. We need to establish some things first. And I think that's just, someone said to me, and this is brilliant, someone said one time, I don't think when we say I'm struggling, it really means I'm struggling. When we say I'm struggling with something, it means delayed obedience. And I think that's what is going on here for a lot of Christian couples. They're choosing to not have children because...
Or lifestyle reasons.
Yes, and that, I believe, is a Fourth Commandment issue.
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, and so it's worth addressing, even as we recognize that it's a tough subject. And no, there is not a number or a law that says we don't want to cross.
But look at your motivation
and look at what God says about marriage. Yeah. So I think that's important too. And this is really for all of it, whether you're in submission, whether you are called to be in authority over others. You said it well, the right authority. And the right authority is God himself as enunciated in his word.
We do premarital counseling to couples that want to be engaged or are engaged. And I'd actually like to have that done even before they choose to be engaged, to be honest. Because and I deal in this role.
By the way, you could save yourself a lot of trouble if you went ahead and opted into that. Because if you're getting ready to get engaged to somebody and someone else spots it and says, no. Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I spend a lot of time talking to the guy about his responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I tell him that when I get him up here to his vows, I don't want you to answer I will if she will. I want you to answer as Christ did, I will no matter what she says, yes. and think that way. But I also ask the woman to consider this. You are binding yourself by submission to who will be your first and foremost pastor of the house. Are you on the right track with that? Because you now still have time to decide otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's, when I talked about our marriage in 88, when my wife used those words, to honor and obey, that's exactly what she was saying. This man is now going to be your primary spiritual leader, in a very real sense, your pastor. You good with that? You submit to that? You agree that you'll follow that? And she said yes.
Is that a faithful decision, a godly decision?
Yes.
It's much like catechism. I mean, you before you joined this congregation, this fellowship, we went. I didn't want you to do it with your eyes closed.
Of course not.
You had to decide whether you could submit to it or not.
Yep. So. Yeah, and that's, I think, at the core, it just comes down to this fundamental question. If you need a takeaway, like, okay, what's the point here? How do I put this into my life? I would say, ask yourself this question maybe multiple times each day. God designed me in a certain way for certain roles. Would it be useful to learn exactly what those are? And would it be beneficial to me or not to resist those designs? Ask yourself that. It seems so obvious, but when you say it out loud, you start thinking of the decisions that you've made, that I've made, I know for me, and you start to go, okay, yeah, that's a challenge. That's a problem. It's like getting mad at the fish because it can't climb a tree. You are a fish. You can't climb a tree. Might be best if you stop trying.
Yeah. This, by premarital counseling, I have them go through the book of Ephesians. Ephesians is only 6 chapters. The first 3 are our kind of vertical identity in God. And then the last 3 is kind of our horizontal vocational duty. So identity and purpose gets answered in the book of Ephesians.
Yes.
Exactly so. And we know if we're not trying to embattle each other for a 50-50 relationship where we submit and take on a godly authority when appropriate, as long as we enter into every conversation with that in mind, we know our purpose.
Yeah, and when you just get in that line, it's amazing how much stuff follows automatically. We are out of time. We're grateful as always for all the viewership and listens and shares and likes and engagement. Pastor is serious. If you got a problem with something we've said, engage. If you're just a troll, I guess you can engage, but good faith we're speaking of here. If you really just are like, no, I think you're wrong, and here's why. He loves that stuff. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I want honed too.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because he really likes it.
My people hone me as well.
You like getting on the internet and arguing with strangers, don't you?
No, I don't really like to do that. I love to porch sit in dialogue and learn lots of times.
So if that can be done digitally, he's game. He's all for it. Anchoredpod.org. Thanks for sharing these episodes with a friend or someone that you think might get something out of them. And thank you also, if you can, for your financial gift. I'm telling you, $10 here, $15 there, $50 there. Someone who says, I'll give you 10 a month, it really, really helps. It ain't free. You know that. And we don't have commercials here. We don't have paid sponsorships. And we would like to never have that.
For the water stuff.
Well, it is, yeah, for Kroger brand water, refreshing and pure.
They are not sending us any money for that, though. That's a freebie.
So anchoredpod.org, if you can help us. Thank you for doing that. And thanks for listening. And we'll chat with you next time.